okay. So I think it's a part of the human condition that we see these possibilities for ourselves, these grand possibilities, and notice how different we are than what we aspire to be or think we could be or should be, and also fear that that gap will lead to rejection by our fellows, and so we all carry around our secret shame. As I say, some of that may be just sort of more social, like I'm afraid people would disapprove of me, and so I hide that for fear of stigma or censure, disapproval. And some of it will just be our own shame about not living up to our own standards, shame about seeing ourselves as not what we wish we were. So I sent you this quote by a guy named De Lubis, who I really liked. It's an old quote. It's got kind of old-timey language, but I really liked it when I came across it because it really resonated with my personal experience, things that I had been experiencing and messing with myself. So I'll read it to you again in case you don't remember it well from the email I sent. And in this context, the temple is like being at peace, being at one, being at play in the fields of the Lord, or however you want to place it. So he says, what makes one unworthy of the temple is the cowardice which prompts one to avoid the experience of shame. For this avoidance breeds oblivion. In contrast, shame accepted is the greatest treasure. The door will open before your eyes when you really understand this. The only thing that is humiliating is helplessness, and the cause of helplessness is ignorance of your errors. Awareness of your errors, on the contrary, attracts you to the power of your God. If you deny the existence of your fault or error, it will strengthen its hold over you. But if you recognize it, your awareness will destroy it. Does that make sense? What's that? It's heavy. I'm going to say it one more time and really let it sink in. What makes one unworthy of the temple is the cowardice which prompts one to avoid the experience of shame. For this avoidance breeds oblivion, like unconsciousness. In contrast, shame accepted is the greatest treasure. The door will open before your eyes when you really understand this. The only thing that is humiliating is helplessness. And the cause of helplessness is ignorance of your errors. Awareness of your errors, on the contrary, attracts you to the power of your God. If you deny the existence of your fault or error, it will strengthen its hold over you, but if you recognize it, your awareness will destroy it. So as I read this, I saw it in the form of vicious cycle and an auspicious cycle, which I'm going to graph up here on the board for you, because I think it's a useful way to think.
You put this out on the web too?
I'll put out the video. So, if this is shame, the experience that you're carrying around in you of shame, then our usual response to that shame is to be afraid and as he said, of the experience of shame, and that fear breeds avoidance. Which is basically unconscious. You're not usually aware of it. Sometimes you are. Avoidance, as he calls it, avoidance of the experience of shame. But then avoidance breeds what he calls oblivion. I like that word. Old-timey word. Oblivion, but it's just like unconsciousness. Being asleep at the wheel, on automatic pilot, motivated by things that you're not even aware of. Would you not squeak? Then because you're unconscious, that leads to ignorance of your errors. In other words, you don't see how you are causing your own predicament because you are unconscious. And that leads to helplessness, which he claims, and I would tend to agree, is the cause of your shame. It's feeling like helpless. Oh, I left out one link. I put this. Wait. Compulsion and helplessness. By compulsion, I mean, you're addicted. It's just automatic habit pattern. So this just reinforces itself. The more you avoid the experience of shame, the more you go unconscious, the more you're not aware of how you're creating your own mess, which leads to more helplessness, which leads to more reason to be shamed. So it's sort of like mutually reinforcing. And avoidance can look like, not wanting to tell people the truth about yourself so you don't have to have the experience of shame. Or it can look like just fooling yourself. It can look like seeing what's wrong with other people, being focused on what's wrong with other people as a way of avoiding the experience of really getting, I'm 100% responsible for my suffering. Me and nobody but me is creating my suffering. And I hate seeing that. I don't even want to know how I make this all happen for myself. So I feel like in here or in my work with people, a whole lot of the time, it's just trying to get people to notice, kind of shift that lens from like looking at it like your situation is causing you to suffer to how are you responsible. And you may not understand yet how you're creating your suffering. You may not feel any choice yet because in the compulsive grip of the cycle, but at least you can start to notice, oh, that might not be the whole truth. It may be that, in fact, I am responsible.
I spent several years in that cycle.
I think we've all spent our lives in this cycle.
We should rename the group as Soulful Communication.
Shameful communication. Nice. Nice. I should have made it a little smaller so I could fit them both in better, but let's see. Unconscious. Okay. So, what's the alternative? If that's the vicious cycle, what's the auspicious cycle look like? What's that?
You read the first thing, what's shame, right? And then we'll try again.
Right. Okay. I'm going to start. You can start, of course, anywhere in the link, but I'm going to start with love. And I'm going to say that as opposed to fear. And I'm going to say that from that love flows a willingness. Like a choice to move toward that which is uncomfortable instead of avoiding it. Like this fear leads to like finding ways, consciously or unconsciously, to shy away from the experience of shame that he's talking about, as opposed to a willingness to move toward it. So you often hear me talk about lean into that uncomfortable experience on purpose. That willingness leads to awareness. So instead of oblivion, you got awareness. You start to notice things about yourself. You start to see things about your patterns. You start to get to know yourself better. This can sometimes include what I call facing the bad news, which is you sometimes have to like, ooh, ouch, I don't like seeing that about myself, but there it is. And so the challenge is to not use that to just, flip up into shame and go into the other cycle, but to go from that awareness into understanding of how you came to be this way, understanding of what would motivate you, understanding of how the pattern works, how everybody on the face of the earth is just, developing their little strategies to try not to hurt as much, and so you develop this one. And hopefully from your understanding flows some amount of compassion for yourself, self-acceptance. Aren't we all? This is where you change. He says shame accepted is the greatest treasure. What do you make of that? Yeah, I look at it as if you embrace that experience of shame, you can move through the self-flagellation part of it into grieving for yourself and into compassion for yourself and forgiving yourself. And in the course of that, also now knowing yourself and having awareness that you didn't. So I'm going to say that out of that understanding and compassion flows power. He called it the power of your God. You can take that as metaphorically as you like. I'm going to call it, in this instance, the power of choosing change. The ability to see a choice where one did not exist for you before. But I also like calling it the power of your God, because this whole process is kind of like grace. When you really see yourself and suddenly see a choice where you didn't have one before, that's just like good luck. That's like waking up in your meditation and saying, oh, I've been asleep at the wheel for the last 5 minutes, but I just woke up. And now I have a choice again where I didn't before. So, power of choosing change, leading to self-esteem, in the sense of appreciating yourself, and which is also related to accomplishment, because like when you have that experience of seeing a choice where you didn't have one before, and then you choose to behave in a way that's a little different than you usually would, and you see yourself do that, it just feels good. You're like, yeah, yay on me, good for me. I'm proud of how I conducted myself in that situation. I didn't lose it in the way that I usually would, or I feel like I was more mature in the way that I dealt with that person than I could have been otherwise. And it's natural to feel some kind of pride and feeling good about yourself when you do that, which just feeds into more ability to love yourself and be willing, and it's mutually reinforcing. Oh, I meant to make this one go that way. Oh well, never mind. I wanted to reverse the directions for symmetry. Yeah, I'm so ashamed. But I'll surrender to the experience of that. So, I think that, we have, we can shuttle back and forth of these and have moments of each in any given day. But I think that that over time, I'd say that this is more sort of like the unconscious drift of human experience. This is more, this is the force of entropy. This is how the default setting, sort of, yeah. And yet, the more that we're able to step into this one, the more that it feeds us, the more that we, oh yeah, this is worth it. And the more momentum we gather in this process, and the more that you get in your body that it's worth it, and a superior way of taking care of yourself, and your center of gravity can shift toward this, let's call it empowerment cycle, instead of shame and avoidance, fear cycle. What do you think? You like that model? Does it resonate with your experience?
I have a hard time with the piece of accomplishment and
Self-esteem?
self-esteem, because it happens to me once that circle is over, either I go back into shame about something else, or how can I be not done be doing that circle before about this, or something like that. Or I can be doing it for a while, but like maintaining a ritual or doing that is really difficult. It seems like I'm a lot more comfortable
Yes.
And I mean, I don't believe it really, but there's part of me that must, because otherwise why am I sitting out?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's a very common experience that we think we should be ashamed. We'd be ashamed of not being ashamed. If we were too self-accepting, we'd be ashamed of it. But then you get to, if you want to engage that this way, you say, okay, if I'm going to lean into the experience of shame about loving myself too much, what's that like? I'm willing to look at how I'm ashamed of loving myself too much, and what awareness comes as I pay attention to that. And start to notice, I'm afraid of people thinking I'm too big for my britches, or I'm afraid that if I don't drive myself with that, I'll just become a lazy bum. Or you start unpacking it, like what's driving that for me, and you start to get to know yourself around the area of how you feel ashamed of the idea of loving yourself too much.
It almost feels like an unconscious mechanism that's been built somewhere. Like, I don't know.
It is. It is unconscious. That's the whole point. That's the whole point. And it is hard to stay in this cycle and not go back to that one. It is.
I don't know what sense of accomplishment feels like, because whenever I got an accomplishment, someone's like, yeah, whatever, but what about this next thing?
Mm-hmm. And to be clear, the accomplishment I'm talking about is not like, I finished my PhD or something like that. I'm talking about a sense of having noticed a choice point in the moment when you could go down the fear road or when you could take the love road, and noticing yourself take the high road and feeling warm and good in yourself about having done that in that moment. Just little micro moments. I'm not talking about, you got a new house or something like that. I'm talking about sort of a spiritual accomplishment in the moment, that you feel good about who you were being in that moment.
I noticed in myself that I came up, didn't stay around, but it's coming and going, like into the body. And I was just changed. Like into the blood.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, surrendering to the experience of shame requires letting go of being right, of any hope of being right. Ironically, being willing to experience this shame, to choose to embrace this experience of shame, is to embrace the feeling of helplessness. I remember one time, speaking of my dramatic relationships, seeing how in a relationship that I was with, I saw how I had been dramatic or unreasonable with this woman that I was with. I saw how, I don't even remember what the particulars were anymore, but some way that I had been angry, demanding something with her that caused suffering, that was unnecessary, and that was a way that I had vowed to myself I didn't want to be. I had already gotten clear that was a pattern. I'd already gotten clear on I don't want to do that anymore. And here I was, I just fucking done it again in spades. And I remember laying on her lap and just weeping with the shame, which turned into the grief of like, I'm out of control. I can say till I'm blue in the face, I won't do it again, but I'm not in control of myself.
What's that?
That's a weakness that I carry, and I just have to grieve it. I have to grieve the loss of my illusion of self-control, which is like grieving the loss of the illusion of being right. They're a little bit different, but they're closely related. So I laid there and I grieved for myself that I had these weaknesses and that I was not in control of myself. And that led to more compassion. Like, oh, that poor guy, ever since he was little, X, Y, Z, and this is how he learned to get by, and poor guy. So the grieving, the shame turned into grieving the weakness, the loss of a sense of potency or control, and that turned into compassion and forgiveness for the guy who has that problem. And then the magic of this cycle is when you are accepting your helplessness, choice starts to emerge as a possibility. This is different than like trying to grunt yourself into self-improvement. This is not that. This isn't like, I'll be better, I'll be better. I'll be better is avoiding the experience of shame. I'm going to try harder, I can be a good person, is a way to try to avoid the experience of shame. Whereas when you surrender to the experience of helplessness and even embrace that my love for myself can't be dependent on my accomplishment, can't be dependent on my performance, or I'm fucked, because it's never going to measure up. So when you surrender to like, I'm going to love myself, helpless or not. Ironically, then the power of the self-awareness and understanding and compassion leads to seeing choice more than you did and having more ability to choose something different. But not because you efforted yourself into it, just because it was grace. Like, oh, here I am, doing that thing I always do. I wouldn't have to. I could do something different right now. Oh yeah, let's try. I'm just going to stretch a little in that direction. But it's different than, Does that make sense?
I think the 12 steps. Admit the power.
Uh-huh. Yeah. It's no coincidence that they use that when they're dealing with compulsion, addiction. And I would say that, most of our behavior is addictive. Most of our behavior is just like running on automatic pilot. This is what I've always done to try to manage my emotions, to try to manage the people around me, to try to keep control of my environment. This is what I do. This is what I do. It's automatic. It's automatic.
It's funny, I'm having a synchronous moment because it has two damn lyrics stuck in my head, which I heard also today. And the lyric is, you go back, Jack, and do it again. We'll turn it down and round.
There you go. There you go. And the point is that compulsion, that addictiveness, even beyond our consciousness, we feel ashamed of. There's a part of us that just is sickened by the idea of being an addictive machine. We don't like that idea. We want to be more in control of ourselves than that. And there's a sense in which it's our potential, it's our destiny to potentially be more at choice and less an addict. But ironically, you got to totally embrace your addict nature in order to become anything else, and not make your self-acceptance dependent on you being in self-control.
I will love myself if I know that.
Right. That doesn't work. Doesn't work. You got to love yourself, helplessness and all.
It seems to me like there's a balance between accepting that I'm helpless while still remaining willing.
Yes, well put. There's this creative tension between acknowledging that I'm basically out of control of myself, and at the same time I'm 100% responsible for myself. And so it's up to me to notice when I'm offered a choice, as it were. When life offers me a choice, can I rise to that occasion? Can I rise to that occasion? So yeah, it's kind of a mind game, you know, really, about whether you have a choice or whether you don't have a choice. It's a, you know, that one has screwed people around for thousands of years, and you got to just notice which awareness is more helping you in the moment. If you're sliding into victimhood, then it's important to you know, emphasize your responsibility. If you're sliding into, you know, grunting and efforting your way through, you got to acknowledge it ain't going to make it, baby. You are not in control of yourself.
I hate that. I hate not being that I'm so, I have a hard time trusting myself. Right now, like, I recognize that I was out of control in my relationships and my sexuality. So I just wanted to be like, no, not going to be sexual, because then it leads to crazy relationships. This is how I'm going to be. Go to an AA meeting, and then the next minute I'm in the pool. I have this amazing sensual experience. Then it's like, swat. See, I feel completely out of control, and I just want to shut off my sexuality because I don't want to be out of a crazy way.
Yep. Well, that's related to what I call another little cycle I call the vice and virtue cycle, which is where with any of your favorite addictions, you will tend to have another circle like this one where you just a second there, where you have your moment of virtue and vow to be better, and you're going to turn over a new leaf and stuff like that, and here I go, and that leads to stress as it builds up, you know, ooh, ouch, I'm getting tense of all of this virtue, it's wearing me out, I think I need a break, and I've been so good for so long. Well, I mean, it's been 3 days. I mean, come on. I need a vacation. I need a reward. So then you wallow in your vice. You know, you have a carton of chocolate ice cream, or you get drunk, or you do whatever you do. Then you feel terrible. That leads to repentance. Sinner, climb back on the wagon. I'll be good. I promise. I'll be good. I'll do better next time. And around it goes. And in my chocolate ice cream addiction story, I was talking about stepping out of the vice and virtue cycle, not letting good, bad come into it, but instead using that compassion for self lens to get to know yourself and empathize with yourself about the pain that's driving that addictive cycle. Yeah. Well, the more that you live in your body and in your sensations, the less you live in a black and white world. And the more you live in your thinking, the more you do live in a black and white world. You can train your thinking to be less black and white, which helps, definitely. But it's also, kind of the nature of thinking that it divides things into either or categories. Whereas if you spend a lot of time in your body, it just doesn't play by those rules. It's